Our topic is Rosh Chodesh Kislev. Once a week we talk about special days, and Kislev is full of special days. So the first of them is Rosh Chodesh Kislev. Rosh Chodesh Kislev is a holiday which really Chassidim made. The Rebbe sort of accepted it post facto, but Chassidim made this Yom Tov to celebrate the Rebbe's recovery from his heart attack. The Rebbe had a heart attack 45 years ago, Tafshin Lamed Ches, 1977. And it was a massive heart attack. It was a terrible heart attack. Dr. Weiss said that on a scale of 1 to 10, Dr. Weiss, the Rebbe's cardiologist, said that on a scale of 1 to 10, it was a 10. It was a very bad heart attack. And the Rebbe recovered remarkably. The Rebbe recovered remarkably. And Rabbi Groner's children just published, about a year ago, a book from his journal. And they have a very, very detailed description of the Rebbe's recovery from the heart attack, which I read very carefully. And the impression that I come away with is that for about 2 months, the Rebbe was a real patient. He listened to his doctors religiously. The doctors gave him a diet, what he should eat and when he should eat. They wanted the Rebbe to eat many small meals, and the Rebbe Pasha cooperated. The Rebbe also slept a lot, far beyond what's normal, to such an extent that the Rebbe in Chayamushka was complaining about the Rebbe sleeping so much. And he really was a good patient. He listened to his doctors. And then one fine day, he decided, I'm done, finished, no more doctors. Around Chanukah time, which is about 2 months, the heart attack was Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres is Chav Beis Tishrei. Chanukah is Chav Hei Kislev. Around 2 months in, the Rebbe decided, I'm done, I'm healthy, and he just stopped listening to the doctors. And he didn't go back to full workload right away. But over the next few months, and certainly over the next few years, the Rebbe went back to a full schedule of work. And you need to understand something, which of course I don't understand because I'm not a doctor, but Dr. Weiss explained that when a person has a heart attack, the damage to the heart muscle is permanent. It's not like the heart heals. You don't recover from a heart attack. You survive a heart attack, because a person who's gone through a heart attack is now dealing with a weak heart, because the heart muscle, the tissue that was affected by the heart attack, is dead. It's not functional. If the Rebbe had a heart attack on a scale of 1 to 10, how much was left of his heart? And the Rebbe went on to do his thing with unprecedented force. I mean, in the years after the heart attack, the Rebbe did an incredible volume of work, and the most notable thing that the Rebbe did, which is it really is supernatural, is the Rebbe's giving dollars. The Rebbe stood for hours and hours and hours, just talked to people and handed out dollars. At that age, with that heart, the Rebbe's recovery was completely supernatural. It was mamish shalal piteva legamre. And this is what I'm sort of, Rabbi Groner, he wrote it for himself, and now they published it. The Rebbe was a patient for a period of time, 2 months. He was really cooperative, and then he said, I'm done being a patient. And he went back to his load of work. That Chanukah, the Rebbe disappointed the doctors over and over again. One day, the Rebbe announces that he's giving dollars, Chanukah geld, men and women. He stood by the back door of 770, and people went by and took dollars. So I heard this from Rabbi David Raskin, who was very close to the Rebbe, that when the Rebbe started handing out dollars, he was telling people not to go, not to get in line, not to take dollars from the Rebbe. And the Rebbe turns to him, to David Raskin, and says to him, how do you know what's best for my health? Maybe for my health it's important that I should give these dollars. So David Raskin said, I took $1 and I left. The Rebbe told his secretaries, the people who usually stood next to him, Rabbi Groner, Rabbi Klein, and even Rabbi Chadukov, here's $1, go. Today there's no medicine. The Rebbe just gave out dollars, and he disregarded the doctors. And then of course what happened, Zeis Chanukah, the last day of Chanukah, I was telling yesterday, I spoke to the seminary-based girls, and this was one of the featured parts of my talk, was the story that Rabbi Yankel Hecht tells. If anybody wants it, I can send it to you. I have an audio, it's a 12-minute clip. But it's in Yiddish. If you understand Yiddish, you want to hear this in Rabbi Hecht's own words. But it's a crazy story. The Rebbe calls Rabbi Hecht, Zeis Chanukah, the last day of Chanukah in the morning, and he says to him, I'm looking for someone who knows how to keep a secret, and I found you, and he laughs. Now, the reason the Rebbe laughed, because Rabbi Hecht was an incredible man, but secret keeping, not his middle name. He was an American. It was I'm looking for someone to keep a secret, and I found you, and he laughed. What was the secret? It was, I want to make a Farbrengen today. I want everybody to wash with me, which means I need chalas. I want to bench, and I want to give keshel bracha, because I didn't do it Simchas Torah, and I also want to give out bottles of mashke to all the shluchim. So he says, Rabbi Hecht, I want you to prepare it all, but I want no one to know. Not the secretaries, not the doctors. The Rebbe understood that the minute these people find out, they're going to gang up on him and tell him not to do it. And the Rebbe was done listening. I mean, this is my impression. For about 2 months, the Rebbe was a good patient, and then he was done being a patient. Anyway, so Rabbi Hecht says to the Rebbe, can I tell the office? The Rebbe says, I just told you no. Can I tell the secretary? They just told you no. Can I tell the Bacham and Marastown so they can come into the Farbrengen? Can you close that door, please? And the Rebbe says, telling the Bacham and Marastown is announcing it until Australia. And any suggestion Rabbi Hecht made, Rabbi says, no, you can't tell anybody. And finally he says, can I tell my brothers? Rabbi Hecht has 5 brothers, there were 6 of them. They were very close to the Rebbe, incredibly close to the Rebbe. I can tell my brothers. It was, yeah, you can tell your brothers. His brothers show up to the Farbrengen, and after Mincha, the Rebbe surprised the secretaries. He sprung the Farbrengen, there was no time to stop it. The Rebbe came downstairs, he washed, he ate a Suda, and the Suda with the Rebbe was bread and water, basically. He Farbrengen, it was not a very long Farbrengen. He benched, he said Bech Sabazan on a cup, and he gave Yossi bracha, gave everybody wine and mashke. And so Rabbi Hecht tells the story, how the Rebbe called him in and said, I want to make this Farbrengen, and I want it to be a secret. And he did it. He went to the bakery, he told the bakery to bake hundreds of chalas. I mean, bakeries don't usually bake hundreds of chalas on a Monday, they do it for Shabbos. They baked chalas, he went to the liquor store. One of the interesting stories, by the way, that goes along with this story is that he had an acquaintance. Rabbi Hecht was a very important man. Rabbi J.J. Hecht was a very important man, a very accomplished man. And he had many friends. I mean, a lot of people knew him. He was a very famous personality in New York. And he went to a liquor store of someone that he knew. And they said, I need a few cases of pint-sized bottles of vodka. You know what a pint is? It's these little, the ones you put in your back pocket. Professional alcoholics carry them around, you know. They're a pint. You can hold it in your hand. It's not a round bottle. It has an oval shape. It's almost like rectangle. And it's made to sit in your pocket. It's got a curve just made for the pants. You know what I'm saying? And the Rebbe give the shluchim these pints, but the Rebbe needed a few hundred of them. So if it's 48 in a case, needed a few cases. So he came to this man who had a liquor store, and he said to him, the Rebbe wants to make a Farbrengen and he needs these pint-sized bottles of vodka. Do you have a few cases? Say, yeah, you can have it. And he tells Rabbi Hecht, it's on the house. You don't have to pay for it. You know, the Rebbe wants it, he can have it for free. And he says to Rabbi Hecht, my wife is sick. His wife had cancer. But he says, but my wife's health is a personal matter. The Rebbe's health is everybody's business. After the Farbrengen, the Rebbe called Rabbi Hecht and he wanted to pay for everything. The Rebbe had a policy that if you did anything for him, you had to pay. He'd never let you give it to him. So the Rebbe called Rabbi Hecht, how much was the bakery bill, and he wanted to pay for it. The Rebbe made a comment about the bakery. Rabbi Hecht put on 2 chalas by his place. The Rebbe said, people are going to say that in the middle of the weekend you make a suda, you have to have like a mishnah. People are going to study every move the Rebbe made. But the Rebbe wanted to pay for the bakery and wanted to pay for the alcohol. So Rabbi Hecht tells the Rebbe the alcohol is free. So he says, why? He says, because the owner of the liquor store is a friend of mine, and they told him what it's for, and he said it's on the house. And the Rebbe says, no, I insist on paying for it. The Rebbe insisted on paying for it. He wouldn't take it for free. And so Rabbi Hecht, the Rebbe told the Rebbe this story. This man said that my wife's health is a personal matter, and the Rebbe's health is for everybody. So the Rebbe says in Yiddish, the Rebbe hat genug gesund für mir und für sein Freude. The Rebbe has enough health for me and for his wife, and she recovered. She recovered supernaturally. So the story of the Farbrengen is this. The Rebbe makes his Farbrengen. Rabbi Hecht invites his brothers. The Farbrengen is poorly attended because there was no time to tell people. The whole thing was a surprise. If you were here, you were here. If you were not here, you were not here. And after the Farbrengen, Avraham Hecht, I don't know if you know the Hecht brothers. They were all in Elam Emes, but I remember seeing them. They were soldiers. They were generals in the Rebbe's army, each one in their own way. Not one of them. The youngest, his name was Shalom Hecht, just passed away recently. Avraham Hecht was Rabbi Yankel, was older than Yankel Hecht and J.J. Hecht. Avram Hecht was a big Talmid Chacham. He was a deeper person. Yankel Hecht was a giant. He was a public servant. But Avram Hecht was, I guess, more of a brain. So he says to Yankel, says to his younger brother, JJ, I want you to know that this Farbrengen was the Rebbe's Suda Seidah. This Farbrengen, Allah, when a person is ill and they recover, you make a Farbrengen to celebrate the recovery. This Farbrengen was the Rebbe's Suda Seidah. And he sits down, Rabbi Avram Hecht, together with his brother, Rabbi Yankel Hecht, and together they wrote this incredibly warm and emotional letter to the Rebbe. First of all, they spoke about how lucky they are to be Chassidim and be connected to the Rebbe, and how fortunate they feel that the Rebbe allowed them to participate in his Suda Seidoya, in the Suda to celebrate his recovery. Now, they just decided that that's what it was. The Rebbe never said that. Rabbi Hecht, Avram Hecht, they wrote this into the Rebbe. So they got an answer. The answer they get was, thank you for the kind words and for all the blessings. And then the Rebbe adds two more words. Look in the introduction of Zohar. Look in the introduction of Zohar. Now, the introduction of Zohar goes on for pages and pages and pages. And it's written in Aramaic. It might as well be Chinese. It's impossible to read. So Yankel Hecht, JJ Hecht, called up his brother Avram, so the Rebbe answered our letter. And the answer was that you should look at the instructions. So Avram says to his brother, pick up a Zohar, come, let's learn it. So the two of them sat down. Avram Hecht used to study Kabbalah. I know he used to write letters to the Rebbe in Kabbalah. They sat down, they learned with Akdamas HaZohar, and they found the following story. And yesterday when I was writing to seminary-based girls, I actually I read the Zohar inside with them. They find the story in the Zohar. There was a Yid whose name was Rabbi. I'll tell you the whole story. Rabbi Shimon passes away. And Rabbi is very upset. Why is he upset? Rabbi Shimon passed away. And he's basically cursing the ground. He's angry at the earth for swallowing up his Rebbe, Rabbi Shimon, the great Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And he's very, very upset. So the story begins with Rabbi being really, really upset that the earth took Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And then he has this moment of bewilderment where Rabbi sort of loses his focus. And after that moment of bewilderment, Rabbi changes his whole tone. And Rabbi says, no, the earth did not swallow Rabbi Shimon. The earth did not swallow Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon was not swallowed. He's alive. He's not swallowed by the earth. So then, once Rabbi makes this decision in his own head, if Rabbi Shimon was not swallowed by the earth, he says, okay, I want to see him. How am I going to see him? So Rabbi fasts 40 fasts in the hope of seeing his Rebbe, who he has now decided the earth has not swallowed. After he fasts 40 fasts, they tell him, I don't know who they are, but they tell him, sorry sir, you're not going to see your Rebbe. So he fasts 40 more fasts. And after he fasts the second 40 fasts, he sees his Rebbe. He sees his Rebbe, Rabbi Shimon. And it's a whole bunch of details that Rabbi Shimon is teaching Torah, and Rabbi is there. And then Rabbi Shimon goes up an elevator in the spiritual world. He goes from a lower level to a higher level, don't ask. And Rabbi goes up with him. The story becomes very dramatic. All the tzaddikim come to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's Heichel in the higher Gan Eden. Mashiach shows up, and Achiachi, all the important Rebbe show up. And Mashiach enters, and Mashiach takes over the proceedings. He starts to run the show. And at some point, Mashiach notices that at Rabbi Shimon's feet is sitting a physical man of flesh and blood. And he says to Rabbi Shimon, what's this? How did he get here? This is the highest Gan Eden. How does a man with a physical body enter into this Gan Eden? And Rabbi Shimon says, no, he's special. This is Rabbi. He is Nikich HaPayim U'Bar Leivov. He's so pure, he's so holy, he's so precise. He can enter into Gan Eden even with a goof. So Mashiach says to Rabbi Shimon, if Rabbi is so precise and so perfect, let him stay here. Let him join us. Which basically means let him pass away, he says, with his children. And they'll join us in Gan Eden Elyon, and we'll have more Chavra to Farbrengen with. So Rabbi Shimon says, no. He needs more time. Give him time. So Mashiach says, you want to give him time? Give him time. And Rabbi leaves. And he comes back down to earth. And the story finishes with Rabbi crying. I'm assuming it's tears of joy about the greatness of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. He wanted to see his Rebbe. He went to see him. He went up the elevator with him. The elevator, by the way, is malachim with wings. From one level to another level, they meet Mashiach. Mashiach first is wondering what he's doing there. And when Mashiach understands that he belongs there, Mashiach suggests to Rabbi Shimon, let him stay here. And he says, no. Send them back. Girls, this is the story that the Rebbe told the Hecht brothers to find in the Akdomas HaZohar. I really hope I don't have to explain it to you. It's nuts. It's unbelievable. So Yankel Hecht, J.J. Hecht, who was a very passionate man, stands in 770, tells the story in Yiddish, and at the beginning he's sort of talking in a normal tone. When it gets to the end of the story, he's so excited, he's literally shouting. He says, think I'm crazy. But this is what I hear. You know, the Eibishter gave the Rebbe time. The Eibishter gave the Rebbe time. He travels from world to world. That's the story that the Rebbe wrote in conjunction with his illness. Anyway, so we celebrate every year Rosh Chodesh Kislev, which is the Rebbe's recovery from his illness. Now, I talk about it every year, and I talk about it so much that as much as it's a meaningful event to me, girls, when this happened, I was 12. When this happened, I was 12. And I was really I could have been a more chassidish 12-year-old. God knows. I really was not paying that much attention. I remember it. I remember Shemon Tzar Simchas Teir. I remember Rosh Chodesh Kislev. I don't remember. I was home. I remember the Rebbe coming downstairs the first time, Yossi Kislev. The first time I saw the Rebbe after the heart attack was Yossi Kislev. The Rebbe came out to a Farbrengen for about 3 hours. And I remember looking at the Rebbe, trying to see if he looks different. He looked exactly the same. I didn't see any difference, but he was very ill. He was very, very ill. Dr. Resnick and Dr. Weiss were sitting in the benches underneath the Rebbe, quite close to the Rebbe. What nobody knew was that on their lap they had a cardiogram. They had a machine that was able to monitor the Rebbe's heart. And the Rebbe was connected remotely, which in 1977 was huge technology. The Rebbe had on his chest, he had a monitor that was being broadcast to this machine, and they were monitoring the Rebbe during the Farbrengen. I remember at one point the Farbrengen, the Rebbe turns to Dr. Weiss and tells him to say L'chaim. They would very often tell people to say L'chaim. But the Rebbe turned to Dr. Weiss, say L'chaim. The Rebbe put his two left fingers on his pulse like this to indicate, as you're checking my pulse. So Dr. Weiss said the Rebbe wasn't doing well. Dr. Weiss said we watched the Rebbe's heart and it was hard. And we didn't know what to do. He said, understand, we had the right to get up and walk over to the Rebbe and say, stop the Farbrengen. Now imagine if they had done that.
It's so hard to see the Rebbe as a people.
So they took the responsibility of watching the Rebbe's heart bounce around, struggle, and they let the Rebbe finish. And he says, Dr. Weiss says, it was the fact that we let the Rebbe finish is the reason why for the next 14... If they had stopped the Rebbe in the middle, he wouldn't have done it again. The fact they said, well, you took a huge risk. That's what he says. We took it upon ourselves. They're watching the Rebbe's heart struggle. And the Rebbe was 6 or 7 weeks after a massive heart attack. And they allowed the Rebbe to finish. I mean, the Rebbe was a good judge of his own health also, but the Rebbe finished the Farbrengen, and he says, he uses language of a doctor, which is not exactly our language. It allowed the Rebbe to continue his career as a Rebbe. It's a very interesting, to call a Rebbe a career, it's like it's not exactly a career, it's a lifetime, I don't know what it is. It's sacrifice of self, but that's how he describes it. So that I remember, Yossi Kislev I remember. So it's Chanukah, I was in Ocean Park, I was in Yeshiva. They put us on a bus and sent us to Crown Heights as soon as the Farbrengen started. By the time we got here, Farbrengen was over. The Farbrengen wasn't long. It was, I don't know how long it was, but it was a couple of hours maybe. And then the Rebbe, I remember coming into 770, and the Rebbe was giving wine. And it was like weird because we hadn't seen the Rebbe in 2 months, and there he was, And after that, the Rebbe, his recovery happened quite rapidly. The Rebbe's recovery from that point forward went on quite rapidly. What my guts are telling me to talk about is that when the Rebbe was a patient, the Rebbe was ill, and the Rebbe recovered from his illness, we got to witness the Rebbe acting out his own philosophy of life. But the way the Rebbe acted as a patient is how he teaches us for 40 years, for 60 years, for 70 years, how we should live our lives. And the Rebbe, you saw a man who looked at life through a certain set of lenses, and he did what his brain told him, even though it was really not consistent with how most people think and how medicine operates. And the Rebbe showed us through his actions how he taught us to live throughout our lives. And I guess I'm going to start with something provocative. I want to say something that's upsetting, because this way maybe I'll get your attention. For sure I'll get your attention. You're all listening to me very wonderfully, but now you'll give me your heart, not just your brain. I have an acquaintance, a friend, an acquaintance, who knows a lot of secular people who are big machers. He just has a chush. He somehow draws to himself the most important American Jews who are secular, but they like him. He just has a certain magnetism, and they're his friends, and he talks to them. So he tells me once that he met a Jew, very, very important psychotherapist, who told him, Rabbi, I find the Lubavitcher Rebbe to be very unempathetic. You understand English?
Yeah.
Unempathetic, without empathy. I find the Rebbe to be unempathetic. And he brought proofs. When people write to the Rebbe about problems, and there are thousands of such letters, in addition, of course, to untold numbers of Yechidus, but Yechidus there's not such a good record of because Yechidus was personal. The Rebbe doesn't pity people. The Rebbe pushes people. The Rebbe pushes people. The Rebbe's solution to problems is don't feel bad for yourself. Surmount them. Be bigger than them. Rabbi Metzger Stark told me that he met a woman who met the Rebbe in 1960. And 1960 is a long time ago. 1960 is over 60 years ago. And 60 years ago, most Jews in the world were not doing as well as we're doing today. We're doing so well, we can afford to feel bad for ourselves. That's literally how well we're doing. This woman went into the Rebbe, said, Rebbe, I have many problems. And the Rebbe said to her, you have no problems, only challenges. Is that kind or is that cruel? A woman walks into her rabbi, to our rabbi, and says, Rabbi, I have a lot of problems. Life's hard. The Rebbe said, life's not hard, it's just challenged. Now, I want to tell you a cute little story. I always tell the story to my students. I had a boy in my class, this goes back 25 years probably. He was a kid, he was 14 years old, and his life was not exactly so much fun. So he was sitting in my class when I told this Vart that the Rebbe said, you have no problems, only challenges. He thought it was the coolest idea, so he printed up a bunch of stickers, a bunch of posters. Then there was something called the Borough Park bus, which went from Karnataka to Borough Park. Wherever he would go, he would hang up signs. You have no problems, only challenges, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It became his slogan. And I recently communicated with him for some business, and I said to him, you have no problems, only challenges. You remember? He says, how can I forget? Because he sit after class, all the kids would go home, and he would sit and schmooze with me. And this was the line that I sort of used. You could say that the Rebbe was not sensitive enough. The thing about the Rebbe is you knew that he loves you, for sure. A lot of times people tell you hard words, you're hurt by them because you think they're coming from insensitivity. The Rebbe pushed everybody. He pushed everybody. The Rebbe didn't appreciate the value of slowing your life down because of pain. The solution to problems is moving forward. You have to understand, he carried a generation of Jews out of the Holocaust, which is the most broken. They had every reason to be losers, to be failures. The only way they were able to become the successes they became was by not thinking about their life, just moving. And the Rebbe created a philosophy, which is, don't pity yourself, move. The answer to problems is to continue to grow. Look at the problems not as it's a rachmanas on me, it's an opportunity to become a challenge. Elie Wiesel writes in his books how he met Elie Wiesel was a Holocaust survivor, but he was the worst kind of Holocaust survivor. He was a teenager during the war, a teenager. He was your age, a drop younger than you. And he saw so much cruelty. He saw his parents murdered. He saw so much evil. Little children forget. Adults know how to manage this kind of stuff. Teenagers are frozen for the rest of their lives in that. And by the way, I think 9-year-olds also could get pretty messed up. But he was such a broken man. Elie Wiesel spent his entire life fighting injustice. He comes to the Rebbe, and he meets the Rebbe. And by the way, talking about Elie Wiesel, he's one of the only people I know who was more moved when he saw the Rebbe by a Farbrengen than when he met the Rebbe in private in his room. Most people remember their private meetings with the Rebbe. He said, I watched the Rebbe werk. He has this Polish accent. He watched the Rebbe werk at the Farbrengens. Elie Wiesel, work, W-R-K, werk. He says, I looked at this man's face, and on his face I see all the pain of the Jewish people. He was sensitive, and he was also very intuitive. He was very smart. He said, I look at the Rebbe, and I see he's carrying the burden of the ganze Klal Yisrael, and how the Rebbe is lifting us. He was more moved by the Farbrengens than by the Yechidus. But in his initial Yechidus, he told the Rebbe that the Rebbe should teach him how to cry. And the Rebbe said, I'm not going to teach you how to cry. I'm going to teach you how to sing. And he had an argument with the Rebbe. And his argument with the Rebbe was, how could you forget? Never again, the slogan, never again. I don't know how the Rebbe feels about that slogan, but my inclination is, that's not his program. The Rebbe's program is not never again. It's a new day. The Rebbe's always future. He says to the Rebbe, you want me to sing? If I sing, that means I stop to cry. If I stop to cry, that means I'm forgetting. If I forget, in the language of the generation of the Holocaust people, I'm letting it happen a second time. And he and the Rebbe argued. Really. They didn't scream at each other, but it was very deep. And the Rebbe wouldn't back away. He says, no, I'm not going to teach you to cry. I'm going to teach you to sing. And of course, the end of the story was that he had told the Rebbe that he'll never get married. He'll never have children. How could you bring Jewish children to such a world that's an act of cruelty? And the Rebbe said to him, if you don't have children, you're continuing Hitler's work. Ouch. That's what he told him. Elie Wiesel got married. By the Rebbe's behest. And he says in this video that I saw that the day of his wedding, which took place in Yerushalayim, a lot of people sent him gifts. The largest bouquet of flowers from the Rebbe. And they were a beautiful note. He had a very special relationship with the Rebbe. But the Rebbe didn't pity him. The Rebbe pushed him. And the Rebbe's whole philosophy of life is you got to move on, you got to move on, you got to move on. And there's one more factor that I want to throw into this mix, which I think is very, very important. It's also a very basic part of it. A person has to live his or her life with optimism. A person has to live his life as if life is terrific. It's not always. It's really not always. The Rebbe's positivity, the Rebbe was a man of unbelievable positivity. And it wasn't philosophy by the Rebbe, it was life. In other words, when a person's life was easy, and the Rebbe says to him, be positive, that's a no-brainer, But when a person's life is difficult, very difficult, and the Rebbe says to you, you have to be besimcha, you say, what do you want from me? My life is difficult, how should I be besimcha? I'll tell you a story which is really, it's upsetting, upsetting. There was a rule an unwritten rule in 770. There was an unwritten rule in 770 that said that if the Rebbe had a yechidus in his office, now 770 was built a long time ago. The walls are made from plaster brick. You don't see this anywhere. It wasn't sheetrock. The walls are incredibly insulated. In other words, noise doesn't travel from one room to another. In 770, the Rebbe can be talking in a room, you're not going to hear a word outside. But the Rebbe sometimes shouted, the Rebbe raised his voice. And sometimes he raised his voice loud enough that you could hear clearly what he was saying. There was an unwritten rule in 770 which said that if the Rebbe raises his voice and you can hear what he's saying, the Rebbe doesn't mind if you hear it. In other words, the Rebbe was very aware that people are monitoring every sound that comes out of that room. And if the Rebbe raised his voice and you could hear it, that itself was the proof that the Rebbe didn't mind you listen. So Mendel Futafas had a wife. Yeah? He was a big chassid, she was a big chassidah, but she also was a mother. They had a daughter killed in a car accident in, I think, 1971 in Elul, September. They came to Tishrei, it was a month later. They had a yechidus chalamoid sukkos. The Rebbe said yechidus chalamoid. And the Bachrim in the Beis Medrash heard the Rebbe arguing with her. She was so upset. She lost her daughter, left over 9 orphans, 9 Yesemim. The youngest was mamish, an infant, a baby.
11 kids.
11. You're a Liberav. Wait. And the Rebbe said to her, it's Sukkot. Sukkot is Man Simcha Seinu. You have to be B'Simcha. So she told the Rebbe, how could you expect me to be B'Simcha? And the Rebbe said, Du sterst Man Simcha Seinu. And they went back and forth. She was saying to the Rebbe, what does the Rebbe want from me? And the Rebbe was saying to her, the Rebbe said you have to be happy, you have to be happy. Now when you listen to that, if you don't know who the Rebbe is, you think he's Pashat cool, he's insensitive. The Rebbe was redeeming her from her pain. It wasn't being cruel. The Rebbe was giving her the pill that he felt she needs. As a generation, the Rebbe once told his brother-in-law, this is Hayrasha, our generation needs positivity under all conditions. And these 2 points, and they're really not so separate, but I'm sort of splitting them into two. The idea that you react to challenge by moving on, by working, and you do it with positivity is the Rebbe's preaching. That's how the Rebbe taught us to live. And then the Rebbe got sick himself, very sick. And his reaction was an archetype, was the best example of how he taught us to live. The Rebbe's life was in severe peril. The Rebbe's life was under very dangerous. The Rebbe's life was in danger. The Rebbe told people at the time, they wanted the Rebbe to go to the hospital. They told the Rebbe that he's going to have another massive heart attack, which he did, and that they're afraid he's not going to make it. He must be in a hospital. And the Rebbe said to whoever, to Rabbi Groner, to whoever it was, if something has to happen, it's going to happen here. I'm not leaving. And of course, as the story goes, they brought the hospital to the Rebbe, and the doctors would say later, if they knew that Chabad had the kind of connections to, quote, bring the hospital to the Rebbe, they would have never asked to move the Rebbe in the first place. The worst thing to do to a patient is move him, especially after a heart attack, but it's life and death.
Was that expensive?
I don't know the details about that. I don't know how much it was donated. I'm sure some of it had to be paid for, and whatever had to be paid for was exorbitantly expensive, but a lot of it probably was given as a loan, things like, I don't know how these things work. But they literally brought the hospital to the Rebbe. The Rebbe's life was in very serious danger. And his approach, his mentality was, A, go back to work, B, you gotta be positive. There was a chassid, a very special man, a really, really special chassid. His name was Kazanovsky. He may have grandchildren in this room, very great likelihood. Rabbi Kazanovsky, Shlomo Kazanovsky walked into the Rebbe, Shmina Tzeres in the morning, to say good Yom Tov. He was that close. He's the kind of person who, when he needed to say something, he walked in and he spoke to the Rebbe. And he walked into the Rebbe, he started crying. And the Rebbe says, you want me to be healthy? And you're crying? You want me to be healthy and you're crying? Exactly, how's that going to help me? You want me to be healthy? Now, how are you supposed to eat that? And then, of course, the more famous, and there's so many stories. The Rebbe asked one of the doctors, a few days after Shmina Tzeres, what's the likelihood of him having another heart attack? And the doctor said, there's a 25% chance it's going to happen again. And the Rebbe went into this trance. It went into this weird kind of dissociation. So the doctor said to the Rebbe, Rabbi, did you hear what I said? And the Rebbe said, yeah, I heard that there's a 75% chance it's not going to recur. He just reversed. But this is classic. So, in other words, if you have to Farbrengen Rosh Chodesh Kislev, and you're like me, who has to Farbrengen 5, 6, 7 times over the course of one Rosh Chodesh Kislev, and you have to repeat the same speech, and you don't like repeating the same speech, you have to come up with different angles. This is an interesting angle. If you read the story of the Rebbe's recovery, you see a man who preached what he practiced. The Rebbe, the way he helped himself recover, is completely consistent with how he wanted us to deal with challenges. Never pity yourself. Never pity yourself. Push yourself as far as possible. The Rebbe doesn't have a normal goof. Chachafila, the doctor said, the doctor looked at Rebbe's heart. The Rebbe was then 77 years old. He was 76 years old. He says he has an old man's heart. His heart is old. Old people's heart, the rhythm is off. Everything is messed up. The heart is out. The heart is old. And the Rebbe looked like an old man if you looked at the machine. But if you looked at the person, the Rebbe was incredibly vigorous, incredibly young. And the Rebbe's, he listened. This is the thing that I find interesting. For 2 months, approximately, he was a really, really good patient. He did whatever the doctor said. He was a very good boy, And then one day he says, he didn't even denounce it. He just stopped listening. He just stopped. And then boom, went back to work. And his approach to his challenges was work and joy. He practiced it and he preached it and he communicated it. In other words, the way he wanted us to live is how he lived himself. And you have pushed a physical muscle. For a normal person to have had the kind of heart attack that the Rebbe had, and to survive would be a miracle. To say that a person is going to go back to work, I mean, you know the story, right? The heart attack was Shmini Atzeres. After Shmini Atzeres is Simchas Torah. After Simchas Torah is a weekday. The morning after Simchas Torah, the Rebbe calls him Rabbi Gorner and says, bring in the mail. And by the Rebbe, mail is 300-400 letters a day. 300-400 letters a day. The Rebbe opened every envelope himself. The Rebbe read every letter himself. Nobody helped him. The Rebbe was like the president, who people get thousands of letters. The president never even knows he wrote them. Somebody else writes him an answer. Someone else steals the president's signature with a stamp. The Rebbe opened every piece of mail himself. And the doctor says to the Rebbe, you just had a massive heart attack. You need to rest. So the Rebbe says, okay, I'll rest. For the next 3 weeks, for 3 weeks, I'm not going to... At the end of those 3 weeks, how many letters am I going to have? How much is 21 times 400? It's about 1,000 letters. So I'm going to sit down at the end of these 4 weeks and respond. I'm going to get sick again. I'm better off answering them today. What kind of 1,000? It's like 10,000. It's 400 a day. It's not 1,000 letters. It's like 10. It's like 8,000 letters. It's an enormous number of letters. If I'm going to have to answer all those letters, then I'm going to get sick again. It's better if I do it piecemeal. Now I don't know what he did. I don't know how the doctors addressed it. Again, I do see clearly from this now published information that the Rebbe for a while was a very, very good patient. But his attitude was, we're going to get out of this. He kept on saying, throughout the ordeal, he kept on saying, the doctors kept asking how the Rebbe is feeling, and there's a lot of very interesting details in this journal, but the Rebbe, from time to time, the Rebbe would say, you know what I want to do? I want to go back to how it was 3 weeks ago, before it happened, and make believe it didn't happen, and just go back to work and forget about the whole thing. And the doctors would respectfully say to the Rebbe, you can't do that. You can't do that. And I think the Rebbe had a pretty good idea that he couldn't do it, but he went back to it so fast. And there's the physical healing, and there's the mental healing. And by the Rebbe, that was a very, very big deal. The doctors couldn't believe how quickly the Rebbe recovered and how well the Rebbe recovered. There was a doctor who probably has now passed away, but I don't know for sure. His name was Tischholz, Dr. Tischholz, who's one of the Rebbe's doctors, okay? Now, if you ever, by the way, if you go online, if you go to the Torah Cafe, you know what Torah Cafe is, right? It belongs to JLI. If you go to Torah Cafe and type in Dr. Ira Weiss, there's a button where you can type in search. You're not going to have 100 lectures. You're going to have a few. Some of those talks that Dr. Ira Weiss gave at the JLI retreats are an hour long, where Pasha tells the whole story that I was recovering in detail. And it's interesting. It's very detailed. Dr. Ira Weiss says that I am allowed to share with you the details of the Rebbe's medical condition, even though according to the law, what a doctor and a patient have is private, because he needed to publicize this during the case of the Sfarim. When they wanted to bring the Rebbe into court to testify, he had to go into court and explain that for the Rebbe to testify would have been dangerous. So it's part of the public record. He said, I feel comfortable sharing with you the details of the Rebbe's health care. And he tells the story in great detail. And one of the things that he says, I mean, you know what happened that night? The most important cardiologist in New York came to 770. Really important people. Some of them we know the name, some of them we know, but it was a lot of chevre, maybe a half a dozen. They walked into 770, they examined the Rebbe, they said he must go to the hospital. And the Rebbe says, not going. They got angry. You woke me up in the middle of the night, you schlepped me out of my bed to come meet a rabbi who's intransigent. The guy's going to have another massive heart attack. Who knows, he'll live till morning, he's not going to the hospital. And they would get angry. One of them started shouting at the Rebbe. There's a description. And they would leave. They would storm out. I'm a doctor. You brought me in not to ask me a shaila in halacha or to explain you a concept in Kabbalah. You asked me to come and heal the Rebbe. As a doctor, my professional opinion is he needs to go to a hospital. And they would leave. So the Rebbetzin famously, Rabbi Krinsky tells the story, walked into the mosquitoes, and she says to Yodel, Rabbi Krinsky, you know so many people. You can't find one man who can heal my husband as my husband wants. So Rabbi Krinsky remembered Ira Weiss. Ira Weiss was a young man. He was in his 30s. He was a young doctor. He said, yeah, I got somebody. So they called him up on Yom Tov. And he says, I'm going to get on the first plane to come to New York, but the Rebbe needs to be taken care of now. So call up my professor. His professor was Dr. Tischholz. He lived in New York. Let Dr. Tischholz come and tell Dr. Tischholz he's just there for a few hours. I'm going to replace him the next day. Dr. Ira Weiss flew to New York. he was an Orthodox Jew from Yid, but he got on a plane. He flew to New York. The police were waiting for him. A police escort to 770. He walked into 770, and before that, he would see the Rebbe. He had to meet the Rebbetzin, Mrs. Schneerson, and she insisted on giving him a cup of coffee and telling how he is. The Rebbe is so sick, and she was being her incredibly cordial self. And then he went to see the Rebbe. But Dr. Tischholz was there that night, and Dr. Weiss says he saved the Rebbe's life. In Derech HaTeva, Dr. Tischholz saved the Rebbe's life because they needed someone to stabilize the Rebbe, and the doctors kept coming and going. They wouldn't stay. So Ira Weiss calls up Dr. Tischholz. This is special. He's Jewish, but he wasn't from, I don't think the Jewish was a from man. I'm coming to New York. I need you to go see the Rebbe until I get there. He was there when the Rebbe had the second heart attack at like 5 or 6 in the morning. And he did what he needed to do to stabilize the Rebbe. And so Dr. Weiss says that Dr. Tischholz saved the Rebbe's life. So very often they would bring him Rosh Chodesh Kislev to 770 to speak. I'm just going to tell one story, then I'm going to stop. I know I'm over. He said, I had many conversations with the Rebbe. All the doctors who treated the Rebbe, they talked. And they were all very impressed with the Rebbe's understanding of, besides for everything else, the Rebbe had a very profound understanding of medicine. Dr. Tischholz says, in all of my conversations with the Rebbe talked about several things. One of them was preventative medicine. That the new era in medicine is not to heal a sick person, it's to keep a person from getting sick in the first place. In the modern world, we're far healthier than people used to be. We live far longer than people used to live. And we have much more information and much more technology and much more medicine. And the Rebbe said to him, the new frontier in medicine is not to heal sick people, but to teach people how to stay healthy. And the Rebbe talked about this a lot, and he would repeat this to us. And the other thing is, this is the quote that I wanted you to hear, the Rebbe said to Dr. Tischholz, there is chronological years and biological years. Chronological years means how old you are. Biological years means how much your body has aged. And the Rebbe would say, I may be 77 years old, but I'm young. I'm young. And the doctor would agree with him. So chronological is viva of passport. You know, a person is 60, say, your people are 50 years old and they're biologically old. Your people who are 80 are biologically young. That's a physiological thing, but it's also incredibly a mental thing. It's a brain thing. It's how you see yourself and how you see your place in the world. And this is what the Rebbe has been teaching us from the first minute he became a Rebbe. And again, if we're having a Farbrengen for the Rosh Chodesh Kislev, this is my takeaway. The Rebbe showed us in his own actions the way he always taught us how to live. Girls, you're younger than I. And you're in the psychology stage. I have a whole theory about people's stages in life. When you become a teenager, especially the later adolescence, there's two things that you discover. Your mind, your brain. You discover what it means to be smart. You discover what it means to discuss ideas. You're so enamored with the fact that you can actually think about things and have conversations about them and have opinions. It's an incredibly exciting time. And over the course of your 20s, you'll learn that the brain is very important, but it's not all of you, it's just a piece of you. But now your brain is very important. And the other thing is psychology. Psychology is meism. You know, my feelings matter, my mood matters. And you start to identify with yourself and you start to appreciate your feelings. We live in a time that's very sensitive to people's feelings. Arguably, we're in a time that's so sensitive to people's feelings that they actually slow people down. Because I don't feel good, so I'm going to take care of me. That's not the Rebbe at all. That's what that psychologist meant when he said to my friend, I find the Rebbe being very unempathetic because the Rebbe was never into slowing down.
Who was the psychologist?
Oh, I know the rabbi who told it to me. He didn't tell me his name. And I don't want to tell the rabbi's name, so I can't give you that. There's so much accuracy to it. I understand exactly why he said it. If you read the Rebbe's letters, you'll feel the same way. But what I'm trying to propose to you, to teach you is, if you read about the Rebbe's recovery from heart attack, you see how the Rebbe, what he told us to do, he did. Move on and be positive. L'chaim kindalach. Okay, I'll see you when I...